Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to this week's Q&A. As always, thank you so much for your questions. And also, as always, if your question doesn't get answered in this video, go ahead and copy and paste it onto the bottom of this Patreon post. Also, please post any new questions you have, as well as please like all the questions that you want answered, because I generally answer them in order of how many likes they have. So before jumping into the actual questions, I actually have a few things I want to go over today. So first of all, I'm actually feeling kind of under the weather right now. I don't think it's coronavirus because my symptoms don't really match with the typical coronavirus symptoms that you hear. I'm basically just feeling kind of dizzy and nauseous and overall just out of it. So yeah, I think I'm fine. I don't think it's serious. I think I'll hopefully be feeling better in a few days. But anyway, at the present moment, I'm not feeling that great. So sorry if I'm not able to speak very well in this video, or I'm kind of all over the place or whatever. So there's that. The second thing is we have just completely recreated the recognition remembering the kanji deck so that it now includes all the primitive elements as well as additional kanji, which are necessary to incrementally and smoothly learn the most 1,000 main kanji. So basically, just to go into this for a second. So the idea with recognition RTK is that you're learning the most common 1,000 kanji in RTK order, and you're just learning to recognize them. So the cards are formatted so that the kanji's on the front and then the meaning's on the back. But the way that I made the initial deck was basically just through taking a RTK deck, a traditional RTK deck that had the primitives, had the keywords on the front and then the characters on the back, and it had one card for all 3,000 characters that were contained within RTK1 and RTK3. And so first of all, I turned that deck into a spreadsheet. I exported it as a text file, opened it up in Excel, and then I got a frequency list and I just deleted all the characters which were not part of the most common 1,000. Then I imported that back into Anki, and I just messed around with the card type so that first of all it looked nice, and second of all it had the kanji on the front and the meaning on the back. So what this means is that characters which were not part of the 1,000 most common kanji but are used as elements or primitives or components of kanji which are part of the 1,000 most common kanji got removed, as well as all the primitive elements. And so what this means is that if you're just going through the deck without referencing the book, this is talking about the original RRTK deck, then there's a lot of things that are just missing. Like a character might just come up and there'll be a component within that character that you've never seen before. And you read the stories on the back of the cards, and the stories are referencing the meaning of this component, and you've never been introduced to this before. You have no idea what it means. And so basically the whole original remembering the kanji mnemonic system kind of breaks down in the original deck if you just go through the deck without referencing the original book, because a bunch of the pieces are missing. Now, I wrote in the MI Japanese Quick Start Guide that we highly recommend going through the RRTK deck alongside the physical Remembering the Kanji book, so that whenever a primitive element or component is introduced, you can formally take a look at that and kind of make a mental note about that. And if there's any characters which have been excluded from the deck because they're uncommon but are used as components of common characters, then you'll get to a chance to be introduced to those as well. And so we wrote that you should do this on the site, but a lot of people just ignored that, or they never saw it in the first place, and they tried to just brute force the original deck. And because of all the holes in the mnemonic system, the retention rate was really bad, and a lot of people just stopped halfway through and just had a bad experience overall. And so other places on the internet where people do MIA, a lot of people are saying things like, or they were saying things like, oh, RRTK doesn't work, you have to do traditional remembering the kanji and all these other things. And ultimately, I think they were running into trouble because they weren't following the actual original instructions. But even people that were following the original instructions, it's still a lot of work to be going through this deck alongside the book and constantly going back and forth and trying to remember the primitive elements, even though there's no cards for them and things like that. So basically, to just solve all these problems, we completely remade the deck from scratch, and we made it so that it's completely self-sufficient. So you don't actually need to go through the original book at all. Everything you need is contained within the deck. We even have what we call instruction cards at the beginning of the deck that explain how the deck works and how to use the deck. And there's also some instruction cards in the middle of the deck that give information that you would find in the RTK interludes. So these are cards where you're not actually meant to memorize the information. It just tells you things that are useful, and then after you read the card, you can either delete it or suspend it. And it says on the top of the card, this is an instruction card. Like, after you read it, just suspend it or delete it. And so that's kind of a cool innovation that we came up with, that we will be using for more things in the future. This idea of an instruction card that actually gives you instruction outside of the main contents of the deck. So that's pretty cool. It's the first time we've had this idea for a while, but it's the first time we've like officially implemented it in something we've released. And yeah, now even for the people who don't read the website at all and they don't follow the instructions, they just download the deck and just try to get going. Hopefully they will still be able to have a really good experience with RRTK, because first of all, the instructions are built into the deck, and second of all the primitive elements and additional characters that you need to learn the most common 1000 characters are included in the right order and everything. So yeah, overall, I think this deck is incomparably better than the first one, and I'm feeling pretty strongly about it. So if you are partially through RRTK, I recommend switching over to this new deck. You don't have to start over. Basically, just in your old deck, delete all of the new cards, and then import the new deck, and then delete all the cards in the new deck that you already know. And that should only take like a few minutes if you just do that in the Anki browser. And if you've already finished RTK, then it's kind of like, oh, well, this isn't going to benefit you. Sorry that you had to go through the initial bad version. But at least now, hopefully, if you did struggle with RTK because of the reasons I explained earlier, and you're talking to a beginner in MIA, you'll still feel good about recommending RTK, because you'll know that the current version of it is vastly improved compared to the version that you originally experienced. So, yeah, there's that. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is this, basically, that there's a lot of people who have been saying, hey, Matt, have you seen that Khatzumoto came back? Khatzumoto's tweeting again, and Khatzumoto's putting videos on YouTube. Are you going to collab with Khatzumoto? Are you going to interview him? And at first, I was, Yoga and I, we talked about it. We were thinking of just basically not responding to these, just kind of letting people say whatever they want. But so many people have been bringing this up and asking about it that I figured I kind of owe it to everyone to address this. So Khatzumoto did actually reach out to me and asked me if I wanted to collaborate with him. But after talking it over with Yoga a lot, we kind of just came to the conclusion that it's really not in the best interest of MIA to be collaborating with Khatzumoto and associating MIA with AJAT, because the vision of where we want to take MIA is so fundamentally different than what AJAT is and probably will always be, that there's really only negatives of drawing associations between these two in the minds of many people. Because although, granted, the current MIA website is kind of a mess because of the specific history with the site and how we've been changing and innovating things, and the site now it has all these random pieces tacked on. But we're currently in the process of completely redesigning the site. This is just a little tangent. But the final version of the site that we have in mind, it's going to be very clean. It's going to be very clear what is going on and what you need to do to effectively acquire your target language. And it's going to be something that hopefully, no matter who you are, you can feel comfortable sending this to your friends, to your teachers, to your grandma, and that it's not going to give them a sort of weird impression. It's not gonna be intimidating. It's not gonna seem like a scam, because it's gonna look very professional and just clear cut. And right now, AJAT is pretty much the exact opposite of that, right? You go to the AJAT website, it's a complete mess. There's all these weird things all over the place, and basically the whole site revolves around trying to get your email so that Khatzumoto can send you marketing messages and hopefully get you to eventually buy some sort of product. And the articles themselves are very kind of all over the place. Now, of course, I really enjoyed the AJAT blog articles back when I was a teenager and I first discovered them. And a lot of people find them very motivating, very helpful. But a lot of people are very turned off by his writing style and how he tends to go on a lot of tangents and tends to just be so hardcore and unreasonable about certain things. And so overall, MIA and AJAT our vision of what we want MI to be is just so fundamentally different than what AJAT is, that we don't really see any benefits, and we only see potential downsides of collaborating with Khatzumoto. Because when I was initially making videos, no one really and when I was making videos and I was talking about AJAT before we created MIA, so many people didn't even want to listen to what I had to say because they had such a negative image of AJAT in their mind. And it seems like through distancing ourselves from the AJAT brand, we've been able to reach a larger audience so far. And we want to just continue out this trend. So yeah, ultimately, we don't really think it's in our best interest to be doing anything with Khatzumoto. So we do not plan on doing any official collaborations with Khatzumoto in the future. We tend on moving in the direction of distancing ourselves from AJAT. And again, it's not that the fundamental AJAT principles don't work in terms of language acquisition. They obviously work. They obviously worked very well for me. But our goal is to help as many people as possible succeed with language acquisition. And because of this, branding and marketing are going to play a very big role. And so even if AJAT has very good fundamental principles, it has a very problematic branding issue. And as long as we're associated with AJAT, then we are going to be influenced by those negative branding issues as well. And that's going to inhibit our potential to spread the fundamentally solid ideas to as many people as possible. So yeah, I just want you guys to understand that hopefully we don't come across as being hypocritical, because obviously I benefited from AJAT very much back in the day. Obviously AJAT and MI have a lot in common on the base level of their language acquisition philosophy. But really, when we're speaking pragmatically, if we're trying to spread these ideas to as many people as possible, we need to have a certain reputation, certain type of brand, and AJAT does not have that type of brand. So we have to distance ourselves for that reason. So, yeah, just thought I would get that out of the way. And so now let's get on to the questions. And I'll probably put that as an actual question so that people who just look at the timestamps and can see that. So Phantom Madman asks, let's say hypothetically you didn't create MIA. What would you be doing with your Japanese at this point? In other words, what career paths would you have taken? Would you have dropped Japanese and just learned another skill? I'm asking because personally, I feel like I'm in that situation and I don't want to become a translator for the rest of my life. So this question is really hard for me to answer, because when I think back to where I was when I first started, basically what led to my career as an online content creator and as a founder of MIA, where I was in my life was that I had spent a long time doing Japanese, like 5 years doing nothing but Japanese, really. I didn't have anything else really going for me, and I didn't know what I really wanted to do with my life, but I also didn't want to be sitting around and doing nothing. So I just started MIA almost out of a sort of desperation. Or sorry, not MIA, because back in the day it was not MIA yet. It was just me making videos about AJAT and having a Patreon. But the reason why I started doing that was out of a kind of desperation, just to be doing something with my life, because I didn't want to go back to college yet, and I didn't know what else to do. So if you're asking me what would I have done if I didn't do that, well, basically you're saying, okay, there's these two versions of Matt. There's the version of Matt that went on to be me right now, and there's this other version of Matt that went on to not make MIA. Well, something is fundamentally different about this Matt that did not go on to be me right now, because that Matt made a different decision. So then in my mind, it's like, well, what is different about that Matt that made him make a different decision than me? And depending on what that thing is, that could completely change what that Matt ended up going on to do, right? So I am the person I am today because I was a certain type of person like 3 years ago, and that type of person was the type of person who decided to start doing what eventually led to MIA. So if you're saying what would have I have done if I've done something different, you're saying like, what would I have done if I was a different person than I was? And so it's like, well, if I was a different person, I could have been any number of different people, right? It depends what exactly was different about me that led me to make a different decision. And I know this might sound kind of like needlessly semantic or philosophical, but in my mind, it's actually like, at that time, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life outside of of this. And to be honest, like I didn't feel like I really wanted to go on and make videos about AJAT. Like I said, it was really just I didn't know what else to do with my life, and I didn't want to do nothing, so I just did something. And I mean, I did have some feelings, like I thought it would be cool to be a YouTuber. I thought it would be cool to get to basically be what Khatzumoto was to me when I was 17 and 18 to other people. I thought that was cool, but it wasn't like, this is really what I want to do with my life. So with that said, to try to answer to kind of basically tell you what I think you want to hear. So if I would have, for whatever reason, gone a different direction with my life than I did at that point when I initially started making videos about learning Japanese and about AJAT, if at that point in time there was like a tree branch that branched off in a different direction, I probably would have not done anything with Japanese, because at that point in my life, I still had a pretty sour relationship with Japanese in my mind. Like, this is around the time I made the 3-hour video, right? I still had a pretty sour relationship with Japanese. I felt pretty negatively towards Japanese culture and Japanese people, and just in general, not very passionate about that. So if I would have gone in a different direction, I think it would have had something completely different from Japanese. Now, at the time, in terms of things I was actually interested in at that time, I was interested in meditation. So maybe I would have become a monk. Maybe I would have gone to Burma and just done meditation full time at a Buddhist monastery for 2 years. I'm kind of interested in doing that still, and sometimes I imagine what would have happened if I would have taken that path instead. So I actually know someone now who he's a bit older than me, but he spent 2 years at a Buddhist monastery in Burma, and it worked out really well for him. And now he's living a more normal life, having had that experience. And so I think that's super cool. But anyway, so that's one possibility. Another possibility is that if I would have held off on making my YouTube channel, and I would have just allowed myself be in that place of doing nothing with my life and not knowing what I wanted to do, perhaps I would have discovered something totally new. Perhaps I would have discovered that I'm interested in some particular branch of some kind of science, or that I'm interested in, some career that I've never really looked into now. Because who knows, maybe I'd be watching a YouTube video, YouTube video about something that I didn't know about would be recommended to me on the side. I click on it, and then I would have been drawn in, and who knows, maybe this random YouTube video that I might have seen could have completely changed the direction of my life. So, a lot of times the way your life ends up playing out is rooted in these very almost random little tiny details, kind of like the butterfly effect, right? So it's really impossible for me to know what I would have done if I wasn't doing this, because if I wasn't doing this, then I would be either doing nothing, or I would be just doing something else. And while doing that something else, I would be exposed to other things that would have perhaps drawn my interest and stuff like that. So it's really impossible for me to know what I would be doing. I think it's pretty likely that if I would have not started my YouTube channel and stuff like that, I would have basically come across something completely new. Like, what I would have done probably is just try to read a lot of books about a lot of different things, just kind of broaden my perspective. And through doing that, maybe I would have discovered something completely new, and I would have ended up pursuing that. I think that's pretty likely, but I have no idea what that new thing would have been, because I didn't actually take that path. So I don't, I have no idea. As to like right now, things that I'm interested in, like I've talked about before, how I'm interested in programming. I think that that's one thing that maybe I would have ended up doing if I wasn't doing this. I mean, and like I'm still interested in maybe like doing meditation full time for a period in my life. Yeah, like I said, life tends to play out in very kind of unpredictable ways, and so I'm basically closed off to many other possibilities of what my life could have been, because I am spending most of my time and energy on MIA right now, and I have been for the past 2 years. So who knows what random interesting events might have pulled me in another direction if I wasn't already so focused and kind of single pointedly focused on MIA. So I don't really know, but I would say don't feel trapped by the fact that you've done Japanese for a while. Like, I know the person asking this question, I think they're probably around like 20, 21. And so you're still super young. You can totally start something completely new. Like, I know it doesn't feel this way when you are like 20, 21, but because I know I didn't feel this way when I was that age. But the fact that you spent 3-4 years pursuing Japanese, that's nothing in the big picture of your life. Like, it's a bigger waste to spend another 3-4 years doing stuff related to Japanese, even though that's not what you're truly interested in, than it would be to start something completely new and just go with that and find something that is actually truly interesting and just engaging for you. So I would say definitely don't become a translator if you don't want to. I mean, I think becoming a translator at this point is kind of a dubious decision to make, just because AI is going to get better, continue to get better very, very quickly. So who knows how much translator work will even be left for humans like 5 to 10 years from now. I mean, of course, literary translations probably will continue to be done by humans for quite a while, but a large majority of translation work, which isn't literary and is more just like instruction manuals and things like that, probably will end up getting done by AI within the next 5 to 10 years. And so there's going to be a lot more competition for the small amount of translation work left over for humans to do. And so that definitely doesn't really sound like a wise path, in my opinion, unless you just love translation work. Like, if you're just feeling like, oh, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I could do translation because I happen to have linguistic abilities, I'd say that's probably not a wise thing to do. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe instead of like trying to figure out what career path you're going to go down right now, just live your life in a state of openness and see what you come across. Because I think, in a way, it's kind of like with dating, how they say that if you like are really trying to find a significant other and you're like going on tons of dating sites and whatever, then it's actually less likely that you're going to find someone that's really good for you than if you're just living your life from a place of, eventually I want to find someone, but I'm also fine being single and I'm in no rush to try to force anything to happen, right? You're actually more likely to end up meeting someone and hitting it off with them when you're in more of that kind of open, less needy state. And I think it's the same thing here. Like, if you're like, I got to figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my life right now, quick, what are my options? Then you're not likely to be open enough to really recognize a new kind of possibility or invitation coming from a direction that you never would have predicted before when that does kind of happen. So that would be my suggestion. That's kind of like almost what I wish I did going back. But I mean, things are working out pretty well for me now, so I can't really say that I have that many regrets. But yeah, overall, I would probably say if I didn't end up going on this path, I probably wouldn't be doing anything with my Japanese. I probably would be doing something completely different, either meditation, maybe coding, but probably something that I can't even predict at this point because I never even got exposed to the possibility of doing whatever thing I would have ended up doing. So you really never know, right? Especially if you read like biographies of people and stuff like that. A lot of times people will take these, sudden 90-degree turns in their life because some interesting event happened to them or they happened to stumble across something that really drew their attention. So you really never know. And I think if you try to be too strategic about planning how your life's going to play out, then that's actually counterproductive because life's too complicated for you to just calculate consciously like that. So Victor asks, throughout the years, have you developed a strategy for defending/promoting MIA in a debate? I recently had a heated discussion with a friend who wouldn't accept that immersing at home is more efficient than using the language in Japan. So my experience has been that the best way to kind of promote or defend MIA or immersion learning is to allow the results to speak for themselves. Before I was really fluent in Japanese, like for the first year or two I was doing AJAT, I would debate people about language learning and it would never really go anywhere because our perspectives were just too different. But recently, for the past couple years, whenever I meet someone in real life, for example, let's say I meet someone who's studying Japanese, and maybe they've been studying for a couple years, but of course they're nowhere near my level, and really they still aren't even close to basic conversational fluency. If we are in a situation where there's a Japanese person and we both are trying to speak Japanese, they will very quickly realize that I am on another level. Like, I am in a different dimension than them when it comes to Japanese ability. And at that point, they're willing to actually listen to whatever I have to say, right? Because I've established myself within their mind as someone who is an authority, someone who definitely knows something they don't know. And once that has taken place, they're more willing to just actually become more of a student and say, okay, how do I get what you have? What is the secret? And a lot of times these people who have been studying Japanese for a while, they know many other people who have been studying Japanese for a while as well, and they'll all be around the same level. And so I will really just appear as an outlier from their point of view, because they know, wow, you are in a different dimension than me, and you're in a different dimension than all the other people I know. So therefore, you must know something that we don't. And once that has been established, it's much easier for me to just give a lecture about language acquisition and have them just accept it and be open to it, right? Whereas if we're taking if I'm putting myself back in the position of where I was after 1 or 2 years of learning Japanese, before I'm really fluent, I don't have any results, and we're purely just going off of conceptual ideas about language learning, I've really found that when someone thinks they already understand how language learning works, there's just a very low likelihood that anything you say is going to seriously change the way that they think about language acquisition, because they just have too many assumptions that are wrong, and all these false assumptions kind of help triangulate their current model in such a way that they can deflect any opposing ideas. Like, for example, I might say, like, well, if you speak a lot from the beginning, you're going to make a lot of mistakes, because Japanese people say things in very specific ways. And if you don't know those specific ways, then you're going to basically just be translating from English into Japanese, and what you say is going to be unnatural. But then they might say, oh, well, a native speaker is just going to correct me. I have a tutor, and I speak with my tutor every week, and she's just going to correct me whenever I make a mistake. So therefore, that's not going to be an issue. And then I might try to explain, like, well, you're going to be making so many mistakes. There's no way that your tutor can get every single little thing. And even if she did somehow get every single little thing, you're not going to be able to retain that, because it's going to go in one ear out the other, because you're not going to have actually enough, like, Japanese framework in your mind to understand why those were mistakes, or integrate that knowledge into your internal language system. And they're just going to be like, a lot of times people will, when I say that, they'll just be like, oh, no, my tutor's super strict. She's like one of the best tutors ever. She will literally correct every single little mistake that I make, and she won't let anything slip by. And they believe that. And there's no way for me to get them to see, oh, actually, that's just wrong. Like, she's probably only correcting 1/10 of all the mistakes that you're making if you're taking into account pronunciation and just grammar and naturalness and type of thinking and everything. There's just, like, no way that she's correcting everything. It's, like, literally impossible. But there's no way for me to get them to understand that, because they don't know enough Japanese to be aware of how many mistakes they're making. And let's see, what's another example? Like, if I'm like, oh, well, there's no point in practicing studying grammar, because that is just conscious knowledge, and no matter how much you practice applying conscious knowledge, that's never going to sink down into the level of true intuition, because in order to get to that level of intuition, you have to actually get a lot of immersion in the language and let your unconscious mind figure it out the first time. A lot of time they'll just be like, no, that's not true. Practice makes perfect. For example, like, when you first learn how to do, when you first learn how to walk, then, you fall down, you make a lot of mistakes, but through practice, it eventually becomes automatic and unconscious. So if I just practice these grammar rules enough, then I'll eventually get fluent. And maybe I'll never be exactly the same as a native speaker, but that's because I'm learning this language as an adult, and adults are worse at learning languages than children, and that's just inevitable, and it's impossible to learn a language like a child. And stuff like that. So they just have these ideas, these assumptions in their mind that all help like all these false assumptions help support other false assumptions, and they've just built this model that seems to be coherent, right? Like there's no internal inconsistencies within their model, and so there's no way to convince them that it's otherwise without actual real data points in the world, right? Because the thing is, they might have actually constructed a model of language acquisition or language learning that is internally consistent, but the problem is that all of the tenets of that internally consistent model don't align with reality. And then all of this is complicated by the fluency illusion, where you could even say like, well, look, all the people who take your approach get really bad results, and all the people who are really good have taken a different approach. But they might still say like, oh no, that's not true. My cousin Jim, he learned French with Duolingo and he's super fluent. We went to like a French restaurant and he spoke to the waiter and he was totally fluent. And they don't get that they can't accurately judge the level of other people and things like that. So yeah, it's just a losing battle to try to use logic alone to convince people of things, because they have this model of how the world works, that of how language acquisition works, that makes sense to them and just happens to be not in sync with how the reality is. But they also, their ability to compare their model with reality and the result of their model to reality is also lacking, because they don't understand the fluency illusion and things like that, and so there's nothing you can do. And I think the reason why this is such a tricky issue is that a lot of the principles of effective language acquisition are very counterintuitive. Like even telling someone like, oh no, your cousin Jim, he's actually probably not very good at French. You just can't tell because you aren't good at French yourself. That just, it seems unlikely, right? It seems like, I don't know. It feels like you're reaching, man. This doesn't seem plausible, man. No, I saw him. He was having a conversation. His French didn't sound Englishy at all. It sounded like real French to me. And so, or the idea of like, oh, actually, you can just sit and watch TV shows and your unconscious mind will figure out the language for you outside of your awareness. And then you'll just seem to be magically improving. That just seems implausible, right? Because everything else in our lives don't work out that way. So it just seems much more plausible that it's like, oh yeah, if you just memorize math formulas for how to use the grammar in the language and you practice those math formulas over and over, you'll eventually get good at it. Even though that's not how we learned our native language at all. So yeah, and my experience, like the thing is, if you're talking about like language acquisition, a lot of you need to have a lot of real life data points in order to support whatever claims you're making. But there's unless there's not going to be any good data points that you can point to and really convince the other person that that data point is worthwhile, because the first person didn't use real data to arrive at their own model in the first place. They kind of just, picked it up from whatever happened to be the first, language learning philosophy that they came across when they got into language learning or whatever. So yeah, I would say, well, first of all, I would say, until you have achieved really amazing results yourself, don't really worry about going around and convincing everyone that you know that this method is correct, because it's likely just not going to work, and it's not a good use of your time and energy. Like, use that time and energy to improve yourself, and once you are at the point where your results can speak for themselves, then you won't have trouble convincing most people. And if you are going to try to convince someone, I would just use the argument of like, look at these people on the internet who have gotten amazingly good. Because for me, ultimately, that was what convinced me that I should do AJAT, right? Was that I showed a video of Khatzumoto speaking Japanese to a Japanese person, and they told me that he sounded really good. So at the end of the day, results speak for themselves. Ideally, you would be the one who has the results, but if not, it's probably best to just appeal to authority, honestly, and show the results of someone else, like either myself or other people in the community, because at the end of the day, humans are not very rational, right? We're mostly just emotional creatures. And a lot of times a very good, solid, logical argument just won't have enough emotional impact or emotional resonance to make the person change their mind. But if you just show someone, like, for example, you show maybe my VR chat video where I'm interacting with native speakers and the native speakers are saying that they thought I was Japanese, and they're just all clearly blown away. That has an emotional resonance on a lot of people because that's something they can understand. They can understand that another human is reacting a certain way and is clearly impressed by this, and that something powerful is going on. So at the end of the day, somehow creating some kind of strong emotional resonance with someone is likely to change their mind a lot more than some logical argument. And really just appealing to authority in that type of way, like showing people have gotten results, I think is going to be the best thing. And in a way, you could say that when I am telling someone about MIA, someone who's already understood that I have very good results, a lot of times I'm doing both. They already have the emotional component is already in place because they've seen me interact with a Japanese person. They've seen how competent I am. And then also I'm, able to articulate myself and the ideas pretty well. So they make sense if you listen to them, right? Like if you actually listen to what I say in my videos, the stuff I'm saying clearly makes sense and it's not hard to comprehend. The problem is, if you have an idea that contradicts that you're already attached to, then that's going to prevent you from really listening to what I'm saying with an open mind. So yeah, really, I would say you just got to really just first of all, just understand that you're not going to be able to convince a lot of people. Like you gotta kind of just let them come to you. Like get so good that you have people asking you how you got good, instead of you going out of your way and saying, "Oh nope, you're doing that wrong. You gotta fix that." Like overall, it's best to just let go of people. Like you gotta accept people are going to be doing inefficient methods. A lot of these people aren't even interested in getting results. They're just interested in feeling like they're improving themselves by engaging in language learning, and they have some emotional attachment to a method that they have in their mind. And even if you logically convince them that their method is inefficient and another method is better, then they're going to probably still just do their original method because emotionally they're attached to it. And I've actually seen this in many interesting ways in the community where, like, for example, there's a lot of people who have been trying to learn Japanese since before MIA came around. And, the original, or they've been like, basically I'm talking about people who like age-atters, right? So there are people who have been trying to age-at since before MIA was around. And the original age-at recommended doing traditional RTK. And even I used to recommend doing traditional RTK. So there's people who come around and they're like, okay, well, I'm about to restart learning Japanese because I, took a year off and forgot everything that I knew. And they're like, should I do traditional RTK or should I do recognition RTK? Should I do RRTK? And I will be like, well, you should do RRTK because of all these logical reasons why it's actually better in every single way. But a lot of times they'll still do RRTK and they won't have a good justification for it. My sense is just that they're like, well, when I first got into AJAT, or even when I first got into your videos, Matt, you were recommending RTK and you were recommending traditional RTK and I just got this idea in my head that like, this is the path and this is the true path. And because I'm just attached to my old ideal of doing what you said in your original timeline video, everything else just feels like a compromise. And so I want to do the original RTK. And I can see that I want to do the original RTK. And I can see that they're not being logical. They're being emotional. They're just, they want to do the method that they first became attached to and were first excited by, even if there's logic saying that there's a new and better method. So this is just another example of saying that people are not logical. People are emotional, largely. And so if you want to change their mind about language learning, you got to appeal to their emotions. You got to somehow make them feel emotionally moved in such a way that they're going to be willing to listen to what you have to say. And that is why I'm not really going out trying to debate other YouTubers about my methods. I'm mostly just trying to get people exposure to my content, because if they watch my videos, they might see that I'm very good at Japanese, see that I'm very dedicated, and what maybe have some sort of emotional response in the direction of, wow, this person seems very dedicated. They seem very methodical, and they seem like they really know their stuff and they've really thought about this. And once emotionally they feel that way towards me, they have a positive impression towards me, then maybe they'll be willing to actually listen to what I have to say. So I'm basically putting my stuff out there. I'm not trying to debate anyone, because if you look at most of the debates that happen on the internet, they don't seem to change very many people's minds. I mean, in some cases, yes, but again, mostly emotions are at play when it comes to what opinions people have. So that's kind of my take on that one. Okay, I've only answered 2 questions and it's 40 minutes in. I gotta be selective now. So Cole McCannon asks, how can I increase my reading speed without sacrificing paying attention to every word? I am a naturally slow reader even in English, so my reading time is feeling a lot less valuable than my listening time due to the volume of words I encounter while listening. In other words, is skimming recommended, or should I be sub-vocalizing every word in my head? So a lot of reading speed is basically just how much infrastructure do you have related to reading that language in your head. Because, like, for example, if you take the pattern like shinakereba naranai, that's a pretty long pattern, right? So when you're first learning Japanese, you'll have to actually read every kana to recognize that the pattern that's happening is shinakereba naranai. So you go shinakereba naranai, and then you're like, oh, so it's the like nakereba naranai pattern. But over time, you'll get to the point where your brain will see shinakereba naranai as almost a single word. And the second that you lay your eyes on it, there will be an instant recognition that, oh, this is the shinakereba naranai pattern. And you won't actually need to say every single syllable out in your head because you will have already understood what is written there. And this happens at greater and greater levels just the more you read, because your brain basically, just as you spend more and more hundreds of hours reading and you get more comfortable with reading, your brain will chunk the language into larger and larger pieces so that basically what you used to maybe think of as 3 words will just be 1 word, and what you used to consider to be 5 words will eventually also just become 1 word. And so your brain will be able to just look at a whole long sentence and just be like, okay, it's A plus B plus C. And once this happens, your reading naturally gets quicker because essentially the number of words you need to read decreases because you're viewing more and more things as a single word. And this process of just viewing more and more things as a single word that you can instantly recognize, it happens naturally and automatically as you get better and better at reading. And so forcing yourself to read more quickly than you're comfortable with isn't going to lead to the result you really want, which is you're naturally able to read quickly because your brain naturally chunks the language into very large pieces. So really, the more you read, the faster you'll get because the better you'll get at naturally chunking the language into big pieces, and that's just a matter of putting in the hours. And I would not recommend skimming because skimming is basically you're basically literally missing information that's on the page. Like, there's a big difference between actually seeing shinakereba naranai and like recognizing instantly that that's what it is, and just basically seeing like the verb and then nai and then inferring from the greater context that it must be shinakereba naranai, right? So there's a big difference between that. So what you don't want to be doing is basically just missing chunks of the information, like just like basically consuming the media in like a very like chunked form, to consuming the text and then filling in the blanks with inferential ability. That's not what you want. What you want is to be able to actually pick up every single thing on the page, but be able to do that effortlessly and quickly. So I'd say it's actually pretty dangerous to get into the habit of skimming early on, because what's going to happen is you're going to basically miss out on information on things like specific conjugations, specific particles, and things like this. And the thing is, you can remove all particles from Japanese, and a lot of the time you'll still be able to just infer what the particle would have been and make sense of the text. But the thing is, if your brain is ignoring particles and just inferring the meaning, then that's going to mean that you're not taking in the information about particles, and that's going to make it so that when you start speaking, you're not going to be able to use those particles yourself because your brain has just trained itself to ignore those. So I think that it's dangerous trying to force yourself to skim early on because of this, because you're not going to be taking in all of the data, and that's not going to get you to the desired result of actually being able to pick up everything that's actually there, but just naturally do that quickly. So don't skim, but should you sub-vocalize every word in your head? Well, the thing is, I don't think that sub-vocalization is a yes or no thing. I think it's more like a spectrum. So on one hand of the spectrum, you have that, yes, you're actually in your head saying like shinakereba naranai, and you have every single sound. On the other hand of the spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum, there's just nothing happening in your head. You just are purely dealing with mentalese, and there's no sounds happening. But there's places in between where like there's kind of a light, soft voice that's kind of mumbly. Like maybe it's like shinakereba naranai instead of like shinakereba naranai. And I know that for me, when I'm reading Japanese and I say like zehi to mo shinakereba naranai or something, like there is a clear recognition like this is shinakereba naranai, and there's still some sort of subvocalization like shinakereba naranai, but it's not like clearly every single syllable is being recognized. And I think that's what you want to go for, because when you pay attention to how you read your native language, that's kind of what it is. Like there is still a form of subvocalization happening in your head, but it's not like you're narrating it and you're paying attention to the intonation and everything like that. It's a kind of a more light background blurry form. And that is where I think you want to be ultimately. But in a way, I don't think you should be that conscious of the subvocalization. You should just kind of let that be a process that goes on in the background, and instead just focus on understanding the meaning, and everything else will kind of play out naturally. And if you're a naturally slow reader in English, my question is like, do you really read a lot in English? Like how many books a year do you read in English? Because if you're the type of person who doesn't read like at least one book a month in English, then probably a lot of the reason why you're a slow reader in English is that you don't read a lot, right? And if you did start reading a book a month in English, then within a year or two, you'd become an above someone who can read at a speed that is above average. So, and another component might just be that some people might just be naturally slow readers and naturally fast readers. And if you're a naturally slow reader, then like so be it. I think that I'm a kind of a naturally slow reader. I think that I read slower than a lot of people, maybe below average, but I don't really view it as a problem. I just take my time when I read and make sure that I have a good comprehension of the text, and it hasn't really been an issue. But I have definitely noticed that the more I read in Japanese, the faster that I get naturally, and that it's different than forcing myself to read more quickly than I'm comfortable with through skimming. So let's see. Renfred Harper asks, you mentioned that in your trial audio cards have higher retention than text cards. This makes sense to me because with Japanese, text cards have to essentially some grammatical errors in this question. This makes sense to me because with Japanese, with text cards, you have to essentially recall two pieces of information: the reading of the kanji and the meaning of the word. Whereas with audio cards, you just have to remember the meaning. There is added difficulty with audio in the beginning stages if you aren't used to parsing the language, but once you have a foundational listening skill, remembering the meaning of spoken words without kanji is easier in my experience. The downside with audio is even if you know a word, you won't necessarily recognize it while reading. Even with text cards, I have many leeches where I remember the meaning of the word learned from that card, but just have forgotten how to recognize it in kanji form. So based on this, would you still recommend using audio cards once you have a decent foundation in listening? Also, if you learn a word via an audio card, would you make a second text card for that same word once you come across it in reading? So basically, what most people report is that when they make an audio card, so basically there's sentence audio on the front, text sentence on the back, sorry. And if they can listen to the audio for the sentence, which is on the front, and understand it, and then as long as when they look at the back of the card, they look at the text form of the sentence, then that's enough for them to be able to pick up the reading of that kanji as well. Because a lot of times, if you just have a text sentence card and just say like a word you don't know, like let's say you're learning the word like batteki or something, then you're just memorizing the information of what is the reading of this word. And it's more of like a kind of factual memory, like you're memorizing a piece of information rather than memorizing a sound. But when you have an audio card and you just have a sentence like kare wa batteki sareta or something, then you memorize that as a sound. Like you remember it this almost the same way that you remember how a song sounds. And so it sticks in your memory in a kind of deeper way. And I know that for all the sentences that I've had, all the audio for sentences I've had on my cards, I can almost play the audio in my head and hear all the rises and falls in pitch and everything, because humans just have really amazing auditory memories, I guess you could say. And so if you have a card where it's just audio for the sentence on the front, once you review that card a few times, the sound for that audio, or sorry, the sound for that sentence, the audio for that sentence is going to be very deeply rooted in your mind, to the point where you can just hear how that word sounds whenever you recall the sentence. And once you're at this stage, associating a visual component to that sound is pretty easy, especially if you have a basic foundation in kanji. So what most people find is that when they do an audio card, because there's the text version of the sentence on the back of the card as well, just through reviewing the audio card and then looking at the back after they show the back of the card, like just looking at the text version of the sentence, they become able to remember how that sentence is how that word is written. And then when they're reading a book and they come across that word, generally they can recognize, oh yeah, this is that word. And then they can recall the reading of that word because they can almost hear the audio in their head, like I said. So it seems like for most people, they even through audio cards, even though the audio card isn't actually testing you in your ability to read the card, in practice, it actually allows you to become able to read the written version of words even just as well, or maybe even better than text cards do. Because a lot of times, like I said, if you have burned the actual audio into your mind, that helps you remember the reading even better than if you are just memorizing like the information of like what the kana is, right? Because a lot of times when you have a text card, you're actually you're memorizing visually what the kana is, right? Like ba, smotsu, te, ki. And so it's more of a visual type of memory than a audio type of memory. And so it actually isn't as strong. So yeah, in practice, it seems like just by learning audio cards, people automatically gain the ability to read the words as well, and even more strongly than if there was a text card. And it's also easier to just hear a spoken sentence, understand it, then look at the back of the card, than to have to actually learn the word through recalling the reading. So really, it just kind of seems like a win-win in my book. Now, of course, there's going to be some times where you have an audio card for a word, you get that card right, but then when you come across that word in written form in a book, you feel like you can't really remember what the reading is or what word that is. And so you have to look it up, and then you go, oh, I remember now. Like, yeah, I have a card for that. Like, yeah, that might happen one or two times for some words, but that happens anyway, right? When you have a sentence card or just when you have a vocab card for anything, it's very common for you to be able to get the card right every time. But then when you actually come across it in the wild, it doesn't click immediately because you have created context-dependent memories. And once you come across that word a few times in different contexts in the wild, then eventually the memory goes from being context-dependent to context-independent. So there might be an aspect of that as well, but that happens no matter what type of card you make. So I don't really see it as an inherent issue with audio cards themselves. I think if you're reading on a regular basis and you're learning audio cards, then everything is just going to sort itself out in the long term, and you're going to have no trouble reading any word that you have a card for in your deck. So should you make a second card for should you make a second text card for words you have an audio card for? No, I don't really think so, because I don't think you're going to need to. If there's some word that for whatever reason you get it wrong multiple times over and over again, then maybe make an additional card for it. But in general, I don't think you need to make multiple cards for things. I think that it's just going to work themselves out naturally. And this is one of those things where when you think about it in theory, it's like, oh no, this is going to be a problem with audio cards because they're not going to test you on reading. But in practice, it doesn't really seem to be an issue, because most people report that learning how to read read words that they have an audio card for is actually not very hard. So maybe one more question, because yeah, I'm like not feeling very good, and it's very hard to like articulate my thoughts right now. Or maybe some short ones. So Lori Posio asks, what changes would you recommend to the MIA methodology for someone who doesn't care about output at all? for reference, I'm learning Japanese. Just don't do any of the stages related to output or any of the steps related to output. Like, I think if you look at the MI overview, it's pretty clear what steps or what instructions are for the purpose of output. Like, for example, adopting a parent is just for output. Shadowing is just for output. Anything actually related to speaking, anything that's actually related to opening your mouth and pronouncing things in the language is about speaking. So just take all those things out. So basically you're just immersing, you're doing listening immersion, reading immersion, active, passive, making cards for the things that come up with your immersion, and that's pretty much it. You're still going to want to learn kanji if you're learning Japanese because you want to be able to read. You're still going to want to do basic grammar because you want to be able to understand the language. The only thing that's kind of on the fence about whether you need it or not is pitch accent. And this just depends on what your goals are. Even if you never care about outputting, there are certain reasons why you might want to learn pitch accent, because you want to be able to perceive pitch accent, because perceiving pitch accent does allow you to have a richer experience of listening to spoken Japanese. For example, you might become able to realize when someone is not originally from Tokyo, or you can notice whether someone's using the new kind of hip, cool pitch accent of a word rather than the old traditional pitch accent of the word. And in general, you're just going to become aware of another dimension of Japanese, which I am very glad that I'm able to perceive. It helps me understand who I'm listening to more and just have a richer experience of listening to Japanese. So even if I personally never cared about outputting, I would still want to be able to perceive pitch accent, and because of that, I would study pitch accent. But it's easy to argue that, oh, you're not missing that much by not perceiving pitch accent, and as long as you can understand the words that they're saying, then you're getting pretty much everything that's important. And yeah, I think you could argue that. So it really depends on how far you want to take this, but I think you might still want to look into pitch accent even if you don't care about outputting. But besides that, just take out shadowing, take out adopting a parent, take out speaking practice, take out filming yourself speak, and just do all of the steps related to improving your understanding. Okay. Let's see. So, okay, I guess I'll make this the last one. Connor Aldridge asks, "Hey Matt, do you think it's reasonable for someone to learn multiple languages at the same time using MIA? How do you think one should go about maintaining their level in a language they are already at a high level in when learning a new language?" So those are two very different questions. So do you think it's reasonable for someone to learn multiple languages at the same time? Well, it all depends on what your goals are. If you actually want to reach a strong level of fluency in two different languages, then in almost every situation, it's going to make much more sense to learn one language and then the other, rather than to learn both at the same time. If you're learning languages just for fun and reaching some particular level of fluency isn't that important, you're really just engaging in the process of language learning because you enjoy or you perceive value in the inherent experience of learning a language, and it's all about the process and not really about the result, and you are interested in two languages and you find it more engaging to study them at the same time rather than to only study one, then I think that makes sense. So in that case, then yes, I would say it is reasonable. So it all depends on your goals. Like, for example, I know that Steve Kaufman right now is studying multiple languages at the same time, and I don't really think he cares about getting super fluent in the languages he's studying. He's already got fluent in a bunch of languages, and at this point, he's really just language learning for fun. So for him, he says it's more engaging to be able to go back and forth between different languages. And so I think, yeah, totally makes sense. But realistically, he's delaying the time that it's going to take him to reach fluency in any one language by studying multiple at the same time. And like, for example, let's say that if you want to learn like French and German, and let's say it's going to take you 2 years to reach a high level of fluency in French. Let's say that if you did one and then another, it would take you 4 years total. So it would take you 2 years of learning French full-time and then 2 years of learning German full-time to eventually reach a very high level in both. So it's you're looking at a 4 years total to reach a high level fluency in French and German. If that was the case, then we might say that if you were going to try to learn both at the same time, it might take 5, 6, 7 years to reach a high level fluency in both, because it's much harder to be multitasking and doing both at the same time. So not only is it going to take 4 years, but basically you're taking longer in both languages, but the total amount of time to reach the point where you're fluent in both is the same. It's not that. It's that you're actually like delaying the total time it's going to take to reach your goal, because it's much less efficient to learn 2 languages at the same time. And there's plenty of reasons for this. Like basically there's the natural SRS effect, where if you naturally learn a word through osmosis because it came up in a book you were reading in a perfectly comprehensible situation, then you might have, 48 hours to come across that word again in a comprehensible situation in order for you to reinforce the memory and retain the word. And so in that case, the more language input you're getting within the next 48 hours, the more likely it's going to be that you come across that word again and reinforce the memory. And this is going to be happening on all levels of the language, not just vocabulary, but on grammar and different aspects of pronunciation. And it's going to be happening across many, many words all at the same time. So basically, the more input you get per day, then the more that you're going to make exponentially more fast progress in that language. So yeah, by learning 2 languages at the same time, then you're basically saying that you're going to be spending half as much time per day on each language, or at least half as much time per language per week, or however you're dividing it up. And because of that, you're going to be making exponentially slower progress in each of those languages. And again, there's just another component of it where like it's going to be much harder for your brain to be trying to figure out 2 completely different linguistic systems at once and keep them apart, than whether it's completely focused on using all its resources to just figure out one linguistic system. That's going to be a much more efficient way to get it done than to be, it's just going to be confusing for your brain to try to be keeping track of these 2 completely different things at the same time. And some people try to make arguments like, oh, well, it's more engaging for me to study 2 different languages, because if I'm always studying one language, then it gets boring. I don't buy this argument at all. I think this is just an excuse people make because they wish that they just want to study 2 languages at the same time because they're impatient, and they are just trying to find a way to justify that choice. Like, how can, like, for me, like, do you ever get bored of spending time in your native language? Do you ever feel like, oh, well, I can only spend 3 hours a day in my native language because then I just get bored of it, right? It's like, no, because when you're spending time in your native language, whether or not something's entertaining or boring depends on the actual content itself, not the language. The language is just a tool to consume different content. So if you think about it that way, then if you get bored in a certain language after engaging with it for a certain amount of time, then you need to find more interesting content, not learn more languages at once. And so, yeah, just to summarize, I think that if your goals are more about just enjoying the process of language learning and you don't care about results that much, then it might be reasonable for you to study multiple languages at once. If you are really concerned with reaching fluency, then it almost never makes sense to learn 2 languages at the same time. You're always going to be better off learning one and then another. Then your second question, how do you think one should go about maintaining their level in a language they're already high at when learning a new language? Just figure out how much time you need to spend in your first, second language per week to maintain, and then spend that much time. It's like that simple, right? Like, experiment a little bit, try spending 1 hour a day in your first foreign language and see if that's enough to maintain your ability. If you find like that's not enough, then maybe bump it up to 1.5 hours or 2 hours, and then spend all the rest of your time learning the other language. Now, you might want to think strategically about letting your first foreign language drop a little bit so that you can spend as much time as possible on your L3. And once you get to a comfortable level in your L3, then go back and kind of revive your L2. That might be a very reasonable decision to make if you're thinking very long term. So that's probably what I would do. Like, right now, I'm actually more concerned with improving my Japanese than improving my Chinese, because I'm planning on making more videos in Japanese and things like that. So I'm actually pretty much recently, I've been spending almost no time on Chinese and just been focusing on Japanese, trying to really get my level up. But if I actually was like, I want to get fluent in Chinese and I actually like cared about that, then I would probably let my Japanese ability fall. I'd spend maybe like, 1 hour every day or every other day on Japanese. And that would be enough to maintain most of my Japanese ability, but it would still slowly drop over time. And then I'd be able to spend all my free time on Chinese. And then once I reached a good level in Chinese, I could go back and revive my Japanese. And then that would allow me to get to the point where I'm at a good level of fluency in both. It's probably what I would do if I actually cared about getting fluent in Chinese. But recently, I haven't really been caring that much about that. And I've been more interested in just trying to have the highest level of Japanese ability possible. So that's what I'm at right now. And that's what I would say. So yeah, I felt like I was pretty bad at articulating myself this week. My mind feels a lot more foggy because I'm kind of sick. So sorry about that. And I will see you guys in the next one.